Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to News Breaking News. News breaking news, new breaking news, breaking news, breaking news, breaking news, news, breaking news, breaking news, breaking news, news. I was thinking about that as some sort of new theme song. I realize it does not work with the music I'm playing. Let's get started. Some people are having a white knuckle day today as the stock market takes a really creepy downward tip. It's actually the third such remarkable downward adjustment, and I'm making bunny ear quotes in the air here, adjustment in the month of January. Though most people only noticed the most recent one, because it's been floating around the internet as the 666 drop. There was a tiny one at the beginning of the month, but maybe we shouldn't count that because that might have been considered normal fluctuation. There was just one day where there was like, what? Oh, no, we're fine. I don't remember exactly where, and I might be imagining it, so fuck that. Maybe we are waiting for a third. Either way, I suspect a pattern is developing. So the news coverage of this has been really interesting, and that's why today is a news breaking news episode. You know, because it's like, I'm going to really address sort of my observations of the news. I have not perfected the method by which I can capture, respectable and legally allowable segments of audio to quote and reference. Mostly because it happens so fast in real time, and by the time I'm set up, it's like, well, I didn't record any of that, and I'm already moments away. I'm not going to rewind the one-channel DVR kind of memory buffer to see if I can get at some cool quote. It never seems to work out. At any rate, I want to share with you some observations that I made about today's coverage so far, and I'm looking forward to how it develops throughout the day. First of all, and I almost made this a Fox News, I almost made this a Facebook update post thing, but I didn't because I was sort of like, I don't want to get lost in the mire. But then I'm like, just pick up the mic and start making a breaking news episode. I want to contrast and I know that I have no references, I have no citations here, I have no links to anything, because it was just moments ago live on my television, and I watched and I cycled through the big three. I like trifectas. I like the fact that there's three big organized religions in the world, and then a subset of other religions that are sort of marginalized that are also a fractal and probably fit in the Fibonacci sequence, although I haven't bothered to double check that yet. But I digress. I flipped through the big three: Fox, CNN, MSNBC. And then I also stop in and hover on like the PBS public news station. But they're usually sort of off some, random tangent doing a cool travel show when breaking news happens, because they run very differently. The way they do their journalism has a slightly more gentle pace. It's a little bit more like, like a daily newspaper or a weekly magazine. But besides the point, I'm not trying to pick on PBS. I love PBS. They get you. By the way, if you're like, I hate the media because it's all corrupt, but you still want to watch news and stuff, go with PBS. I'm aware, by the way, that news corporations are corrupt. Let me share with you. Let me preview here on this tangent of corruption an upcoming post for my social media. I'm going to post it on my Instagram as a special sort of three-parter, and then I'm going to make it a little different meme for sharing on other media. Of course, the insert name of system here, end bracket, is corrupt. Of course it is. But it is worth taking into account that the politicians want you to think that bracket, insert name of system here, end bracket, is way more corrupt than it actually is. Because then they can control you easier. That's way too long and wordy. I'm going to pare it down to a much more straightforward meme. But the point is, yes, of course news media is corrupt. But the news media itself and the politicians who constantly shout against it want you to believe that it is 10,000 times more corrupt in a more totalitarian, like they're just spewing out propaganda. And in a way they are, but in a way they're not. I think that it's a mixed bag and it's much less overt and top-down and complete as they might paint the picture of it being. But that, that's up for debate, I suppose. Here's what I noticed. And this is where it's important, because we're talking about this particular crash. But all three were in a reconciliatory sort of like, everybody hold your horses, don't freak out too much kind of mode. But the tone of how they explained why no one should freak out was each very interestingly different. And I want to start with Fox, because it's the one I think deserves the most questioning and critique. Fox News was going, whoa, scary, downward spike, kind of freaky, everyone's tripping out, and then, but relax. It's not only normal, it's to be expected. We want this sort of downward spike. We really need this. It's a good correction. We've been sort of almost predicting that it would happen soon enough. And of course, gently excusing the president for not addressing it and, or not, taking ownership of it, as he has done with all the upward movement in his year and 1 month in office. If the stock market rallied a certain week better than the previous two, he's taken personal credit for it. But right now that in the two times now this month that it has dropped, once 660 points for one of the specific markets, it wasn't for all markets, but all three markets dropped that day. I don't know all the numbers exactly. You can look them up. You have the internet right in front of you. You can look them up while I'm talking, while you're listening to me talk if you want. So anything I don't have a reference for, you can just Google the words I just said. I should start making that a prompt and pausing for a minute, making like a feature of the show. Ding! Where's my bell? Today's drop has been a little bit more abrupt, a little bit more intense, and a little bit weirder for a couple of different reasons that I will address in a moment, but especially if I don't forget to come back to this central point, which is why I plastered on the title. Okay, so that was Fox News. Like, all right, this is a little crazy, but, also sort of normal and expected, and we need it. It's good for us. And what they're not going into depth with is that the people who benefit when the market tanks, as I've pointed out to you in the past, are the people who are positioned and bankrolled thick enough to be able to take up all the lost value, and then they get the returns when the value returns, when the overall market rebalances or goes back on an upward swing. So the only people who benefit, for whom it is good when a stock market goes down, especially this fast and this intensely, are those that soak up the losses by buying at low prices. Now, of course, that's sort of fundamental. That's sort of fundamental to the market, right? Everyone knows buy low and sell high. But the problem is that those who suffer the most negative impact. Here's what Fox has not talked about at all, at least not in depth and with the kind of clarity that they talk about other things, is that the people who take the biggest hit are those who, for example, to reference something that Donald Trump has been referencing, people whose only real connection to the stock market is their 401k retirement account or some other form of banking tool where they're not personally trading, but how much money they have in the account or how much that money is worth, how much that account has value, is directly or negatively impacted by these horrible spikes. And that then they don't get the kind of return that everyone else gets because they've only suffered the loss of selling off at a terrible time. And then whatever the bank, whatever that system of money management is, they're doing something other than what the individual traders who have the deepest pockets and the fattest bankrolls can do to take up so much paper, so much to trade in, to give, to buy so much shitty stock or shittily priced stock. So the 401ks don't rebound ever as well. They lose value, and then they kind of sort of bounce back a little, but they revaluate much lower than they ever were at a high, is my impression. I could be wrong. Maybe they spike right the fuck back up whenever there's a crazy growth movement. I've noticed that trend tends to be slower, right? In my opinion, in my perception. I could be wrong about it, but I digress. So that's the way Fox News covered it, and also the thing that they didn't really address, in my opinion. And then MSNBC was interesting because they wanted to go, they were once again let's everyone be chill, and they wanted to discuss sort of the interesting, nerdy, historical correlations of past stock market performance. And there was a sort of we don't know, the talking heads giving the sort of primary narrative, and then speaking out to the anchors. Would say I'm not that smart. I'm just your good old guy reporter. I just report the news. But here's a specialist that really knows what's what. And the specialist would come on and really go to a scripted bullet point, pat sounding the economy's still doing well. Let's remember that the market is not the economy, even though the market is deeply attached and severely influences the economy, and often politically is conflated on purpose with the economy whenever it's beneficial to the politician doing the conflating. So they were at a sort of they were again normalizing, trying to brace the fears, but also a little bit of the social critique. They commented on the 401ks. All right, they're the ones who were yeah, and it's kind of the rich people are going to be okay, but it's the middle class and the sort of entry level people who didn't really know what they were doing that are going to take the hit. They're kind of the ones that sort of lament the truth because it is part of the story. That's their echo chamber because they want you to feel like they are on your side, whoever you are, that are listeners of them. And Fox News is more about you can trust us. We know what's going on. You don't have to worry about this because it's expected and it's a good adjustment. You don't have to think about this idea. Whereas MSNBC is sort of oh, isn't it a bummer? But at least we're savvy and we know, and we're on your side, and we're going to fight for your rights, even though they're just telling you the news and telling you that essentially the wealthy are going to probably capitalize on this and soak up all of those lost trillions of dollars in value that was just lost, because it was literally reported at trillions of dollars of stock market value totally wiped out. But it's going to get soaked up and then reharvested, and that's the way it's supposed to work. I get it. And that's sort of the problem when you build a system on the predicate that profiteering at all costs is what matters, right? That's always at the core of market system and of economic system as we have it now today in America / Trumptopia. But let me get to my favorite. My favorite was CNN. While they sort of split the difference, as they are the sort of middle ground guys, they try to play the we get it that there's a sort of left-leaning angle and there's a right-leaning angle. We're going to fight for our right to pretend to be the centrists. They are definitely sort of more progressive leftist, anybody that they can sort of get on that side than they are trying to fairly represent the right. And they're very happy to poo-poo on the right. But I digress. Their coverage... Now, let me zoom back a little bit and add an ingredient that I was sort of leaving out. And it's probably why you're listening. Hopefully this works, right? I'm trying to be more thoughtful in the structure of my rants and raves here. CNN was the first channel in the time frame that I watched, and I was flipping and watching for a bit and trying to soak up their tone and their directionality and how they were trying to work this story. And it was one of those moments in time where simultaneously every anchor on every show, regardless of the show, on all the three big channels, was exclusively talking about this. about this drop, and they were all like referencing the same stock market graphics and numbers, and et cetera, et cetera. Oh, Fox News, by the way, let me back up and I forgot another thing that I left out, but I should have said it before the bit I'm about to reveal or get into. Fox News is obviously pro-Trump and sort of, apologizing, being apologists rather, in this Socratic and philosophical sense, being apologists for the stock market not doing what is most beneficial for Trump's messaging. And they did not even correlate. They did not point out at all that the majority time frame relationship of downward spike to what was previously on the news when the spike started, what was just on the news when the spike was starting and through the primary phase of the down, like they they waited until Donald Trump stopped giving a speech to cut away from the regular programming to tell us that the stock market was tanking. Guess what? It started just as or just before, from what I've gathered. I could be wrong, or maybe right in the middle, somewhere like in the early phase of Trump's speech, which is really weird. This is an interesting facet. I should have layered the Trump layer in. That's why I'm doing this now. I should have done that a little bit earlier. But so this also correlated with the 666 downward spike. It happened right around. Now, I don't remember if it was as close. It might have been like right after, like the day after, and I'll look it up. But I something tells me that it was really closely aligned with the State of the Union speech. And there's a whole like hand gesture 666 thing in association, in there. People are trying to correlate with the State of the Union speech, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But this one was dead on. Like I turned on, and here's how my morning was spent. My mid-morning, through noon, getting ready to do this show. I turn on the TV, and the newscasters are wrapping up whatever on all three channels. They're wrapping up the sort of previous round of discussions of something I didn't catch. So I was just like, I'm not sure what they're talking about. Whatever. And then transitioning to Donald Trump's talking. And so Donald Trump gave a speech. I sort of half-assed listened to it because at that point I was eating breakfast and also doing birthdays on Facebook, because that's sort of like a ritual that I really want to honor every day. If you're on Facebook, happy birthday today. I posted a Facebook happy birthday thing at you. And if you want to be a recipient of my happy birthday message on your birthday, just add me on Facebook and follow me, and make sure that Facebook knows to tell me when it's your birthday. There's a thing you sometimes have to check mark if your profile is really private or something, but I digress. So the speech that he was giving was all about, look at me and the economy so good and people love my tax break and this lady made $1,000 and then her boss gave her $1,000. So this woman, he was basically winding up to like featuring some folks that were there to say good things about the tax policy that he just passed. And there was a woman that very sort of, oh wow, I can't believe she doesn't feel like really grossed out by her own words yet, but she might in the near future. She basically thanked the president for giving her a couple of $100 extra a month to help make ends meet. In other words, she's barely recognizing that her family lives in really nice surroundings, but maybe 3 months away from life-altering, life-shattering poverty. That's what she was grovelingly thanking the president, like, oh, thank you, Mr. President, for doing something that's helped me have a couple, like, and on CNN during the speech and leading up to the speech and surrounding the speech, they were discussing that, right before the speech, rather, they were discussing that for the biggest section of people, the quote-unquote tax relief raise that you get, not the bonuses that companies are giving, and apparently I missed a scandal, so I'm sort of like totally just, I saw like the last few snippets of this, and I was like, huh, what? But people calculated it out, and Paul Ryan celebrated a $1.40 raise on your check, like on your like your weekly check. That only adds up to like 60 more bucks. So apparently, some woman, and this is what CNN was covering right before the Trump speech. They transitioned to that. A woman created some sort of scandal either late yesterday or earlier today, or at some point. I hadn't heard of it at all yesterday. Because she answered a tweet of Paul Ryan's and got automatically offered, because of some automatic promotional thing that they were doing, a survey from someone, and I'm not entirely sure who. I missed that reference from her story, but that asked about, how she felt about the tax plan, blah, blah, blah. It was like several questions about the tax plan, and it ended with, what will you do with the extra money you now have because of Donald Trump's amazingly super great, awesome, huge tax break that he gave you? And she said, oh, it just barely covers my Costco club membership for the year, so I think I'll use it on that. And she didn't mean it to be negative. She was like, cool, because that's how brainwashed we all are about taxes and about how awesome it is that they gave us a shitty little tiny break. And yet the corporations and the billionaires get a permanent lifetime multi-billion-dollar break that equates to individual, like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for individuals. And they're like, that's cool and all, and we all want to be rich, but they're already super motherfucking rich. Why do they need to be more richer? That is the equation for greed, when more is not enough. Get it? So this woman is like, she didn't mean a criticism, but the politicians are so hypersensitive towards criticism, especially from their own base. Get this. Paul Ryan pulls the tweet and sort of covers it up and like, oh, that never happened. And then the news mill, and there's my evidence for like real journalists actually trying to get some real shit out. Like, that could have just been easily squashed if all we had was a true, like, dictatorship of news media. We don't. There's real people trying to get real news out there from their own individual perspective of what's important. And that's what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have an organized connection of voices, a collection of voices heralding out some facts so that we don't lose sight of what's going on in the world. But I digress. Digressing back. So that's what was the tee-off to, like, that was the start-off to the speech, which was then supposed to be Trump's great... I don't know what Fox was doing during the speech. I, saw even less of what their coverage was, and MSNBC was doing something similar about, this... Everyone, people are supposedly happy about this... MSNBC was having a fair and balanced debate between a Republican talking head and a not Republican talking head, and that, yeah, okay, people are happy about the tax break at all levels, even the ones who are getting a ridiculously, stupidly small tax break that's temporary. And, okay, maybe that's fine that they're happy. Then Trump's speech begins, and it's very Trumpy. He is getting much better at reading the speech off the teleprompter and sticking to it, but he's still sort of like, meh. This one sounded like he wrote it. Like, they're like, oh yeah, fine, you can write the speech, and it's just his words up on the teleprompter, or someone's really getting the tone down on his writing staff, so he's less and less seduced to get off script, because his own script that they gave him is already sounding very much like the way he talks, so his brain is satisfied. Or he's been replaced by some sort of lizard person, cyborg robot clone, something, right? Alien in a mask. I don't know, because he does look weirder and more orange. But anyways, I kid. I'm just kidding, you guys. I don't take that too seriously. Except that if the AI slave masters are listening, I'm about to call it here, because it's it's all fake, but it's all real. The big point is his speech was self-patting on the back about how he's personally responsible for the market being so great and how, we're going to make it greater. He had a couple of really interesting points. Something else I almost posted on Facebook, but that I knew I didn't have enough context in the character limit to make it make sense, was that he spelled out in our faces at everybody one of the systemic agenda tools that is how they control the political addicts. They can't control all of us this way, but they sure as hell help kind of control the voters, whoever the voters are. No offense, voters. I love you guys for voting, but they do influence and manipulate you up and down, left and right. And here's how. He spelled out, I wish I'd remembered to copy and paste it because it was a really complex, it was a really cool new term that I just made up. No, here it is. Trump just literally explained the complacency pendulum mechanism. Let me repeat that. Trump just, and it's only because I copied and pasted it twice apparently. Into itself. Trump literally just explained the complacency pendulum mechanism that is inherent in polemic party political ideology control mechanisms. And here's what he was saying. He was like, here's what usually happens, folks. You know, like the winners, my base, yay, my base. You guys are all happy and you hear about stuff like the tax breaks. I don't have a good Trump impression. I'll stop. Other people do a better Trump impression than me. I used to do a pretty decent Bill Clinton impression back in the day. And I tried to work on a Papa Bush 1 impression, but back then, I wasn't doing any of this podcasting, so there was no real reason for me to work on it. So none of those ever got really great. But Trump was applauding himself, taking credit for the economy being really good, and explaining this complacency pendulum, and kind of laughing about it. And of course, wrapping up the speech by saying, we're not going to let that happen now. We're going to dominate in 18. We're going to dominate in 20. There he sounded like Nixon. That was my crap Nixon impression wanting to get a word. I should work on all my old president impressions and then do Trump as all the old presidents just to fuck with people's heads and ear balls. Yeah. Thanks, audience, for giving me that. Somebody in the audience just gave me that idea. Thank you, audience. Like telekinetically. Or, I stole it from the ether. Whatever words make most sense to you. Inspiration just came to me. Oh, by the way, this is sort of how I'm going to link or promo my next Almost Daily Zencast episode, where it's just the Zencast part. I'm going to talk about the word inspiration and what it actually means and how we've been sort of guided to misuse it. Because ego's everywhere, my friends. Laying traps for you about everything. So, he's doing that. Trump is. His speech is happening. He's patting himself on the back. He's, as I criticized the DNC for during the conventions, he's using the victims of his own Machiavellian policy to extol the virtues of his Machiavellian policy, because the victims generally don't understand who Machiavelli, what's his name? Not Mac the Knife, Machiavellian. What do we say Machiavellian? His name was Machiavelli? Yeah. I can't pronounce foreign words too good. But they don't, the base doesn't get it. Forgive me for criticizing you guys that are core in the base. I love you guys, sending you love and energy every day, and praying that you slowly but surely, like your brothers and sisters around you, closer to the edge of the fringe of the base, are waking up to how you're being played. And here's the grand weirdness, and I'll continue to my final layer. During the speech, the market tanks, wiping out. Or at least, if that woman had a 401k, and if it was of the kind of not such big, huge size that most people of that, working middle class, lower class have, no one in America likes calling themselves lower class. But those are who the victims are, and that's who his supporters are. And it's not that they're lower class because they're stupid. They're stupid because they're stupid. That's an independent issue. Anybody who is stupid, no offense, because I love everybody. I love the stupid people as much as I love the smart people. Smart people can be stupid too. I am a stupid person. Everybody is stupid. We have to wake up to our universality of all things. But those in the economic lower class are the ones that are the most negatively impacted by all of these things that he is actually succeeding in implementing. Setting aside the criticism that he's failing at implementing a shit ton of things. For example, another social media acquaintance of mine posted a bunch of hate speech at Obama about Obamacare. And I was like, hey, brother, what's up? Why are you hating on Obamacare? Not because I'm a big defender of Obamacare. Do not get me wrong. I am not. But because I wanted to know what was going on with him. And he's like, well, blah, 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 fuck him. And, you know, the fee for not having insurance is really big. And I just pay taxes and it chunked me out. But before we got to that, before he explained, because it took him a while, and I was commenting on his thread, I was like, hey, by the way, did you know Obamacare, before it was Obamacare, was literally, for reals, in real life, Mitt Romney care, because he implemented it word for word exactly as it existed as Obamacare before Obama in his state, whatever the fuck state he was governor of. And then in the development of it, I think it was Mitt Romney and other GOP governors from around the country in red states collaborated with the American Heritage Foundation or the National Heritage Foundation. I forget what its actual name is, but it's Heritage Foundation is what it's most commonly called, which is an ultra deep right-wing GOP think tank, like way in the right. Arguably more extreme right than Donald Trump himself. But, you know, like Obamacare, you can't hate Obamacare just because the GOP leadership told you to hate Obamacare, because they're lying to you, because it is something the Republicans invented. They just hate him because he's black. Right? I know that's like late breaking news. I think most people on the open-minded side, non-engaged in politics or supporting Obama, realize that day one. But I don't think that my friend realized that yet, so that was my point. And so I'm like, and I followed up again. This is all sort of like things I commented at him during an interval of time where he had not responded to me yet, and I was just like adding my thoughts to the stream of commentary on his post. And I was like, oh, and also, by the way, in addition to all that stuff, Trump struck down the one thing he succeeded in doing, because he did not, I repeat, in any way, shape, or form, successfully repeal and replace Obamacare as a whole system. Not on day one, like he promised over and over again. Not in week one, not in month one, not in quarter one, not in year one. The very end of the year, though, with his tax plan, he did eliminate the individual mandate fee. Not the mandate itself, I think, ironically, but just the fee. There's still like wording saying everyone should get healthcare because that's what makes sense for this market, the way we structured it to work. And let's remember, the Republicans invented it. Obama said, wow, that's the most interesting, progressive, and thoughtful thing the Republicans have ever invented. I'm borrowing it. Kudos, Republicans. Oh, you're going to hate me because I'm borrowing it. Fuck you guys. I'm just going to own it. And then you can hate me because it looks bad on you. And then, so my friend finally replies, well, I just did taxes and I just got charged X $100. I don't remember the exact number. It was over $300 or $400 though that he got charged. So that doesn't seem right to me because I never got Obamacare. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm an advocate for not having health care. I just am non-participatory in certain, you know, political things. And I did not register for Obamacare because I didn't appreciate how its history and how it's really a Republican designed. It's very Machiavellian that the GOP leadership would successfully brainwash the entire Democratic Party and the Republicans into believing that Obamacare sprang forth from Obama's forehead, from his third eye, whole, like fucking what's her name, that goddess that sprang forth from Zeus's head. You know, like that's not what happened with Obamacare, folks. But they brainwashed you on both sides to believe that. So I was like, I'm not even playing that game. Mr. Zeppa don't play that shit. So, homie, don't play that game. To quote, what's his name? Whose name I can't remember right now. But I love him. He's amazing. He's a funny comedian. Digressing. So my friend like says blah, 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 blah. And I could only reply, well, bummer. That's, I guess, another Trump promise that's not really fulfilled. He made it sound like, boom, you guys ain't paying that this year. But people are already doing early filing, and they're apparently having to pay the Obama-era penalty, which Trump has supposedly already celebrated, supposedly striking down and eliminating. So, In the world of Trump promises, he is a clusterfuck of fail. As I've always described him, a clusterfuck. It seems like he wants to fail, and yet somehow he's buoyed up. And I think that, this goes to my meta thesis that it's all interplay at a much deeper level that we are not even allowed to contemplate mostly, and that I'm encouraging you guys to contemplate. And that I mean deeper than the Illuminati. Speaking of which, breaking news, I saw a post today that the Illuminati is not the Rothschilds of Israel, but rather some central bank cartel from Switzerland. And I've either heard of that a long ass time ago and then thought it got debunked, or didn't like it at the time and ignored it, or I've never heard that before because it struck me as really weird and foreign, but also sort of like, familiar territory. And my only response was like, I'm confused. I totally thought that the people at the center of that problem were the Rothschilds and the whole like Israel wants to take over the world thing. So now there's another central bank conspiracy cadre, another central bank Illuminati, competing central bank conspiracies. Huzzah! How exciting. So there's that. Let's all look into that and find out what the hell. I should pull up that post because there was actually a lot of details about what some conspiracy theorists had mapped out in terms of banking networks and who owns what, etc., etc. I try to never get too lost down the rabbit hole of political, cultural, national, philosophical details about that, because you do not need a conspiracy theory more complicated than ego and greed corrupting us at an individual level and at a species-wide spiritual network level. And you don't need a solution more crazy or insane than love and compassion and forgiveness and healing at an individual level and at a spirit, esoteric network-wide level. There's no need to get lost in the who's the Illuminati and who isn't and blah, 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 when the solution doesn't need to identify the individuals ever, because we are all one on this network. But whole episodes about that elsewhere. Here's the final layer that I really want to not forget about and that I really want to hit before I wrap up this episode of News Breaking News for you. All three news channels indicated something that was really weird, but only one of them sort of addressed them as sort of, maybe this is what we should be concerned about, which is curious. And I'm pretty certain it was CNN. The other two just sort of talked about it like, oh, it's cool, whatever. And that is the following fact, that the spike down and the trading involved in terms of percentages of volume, overall volume involved in the downward spike, and the volume that you could consider that possible to attribute the cause for the downward spike of trading was not trading being done by human people trading on the stock market or from home or out there actually physically, because we still do that, right? We still physically trade like actual people on paper and ledgered, and then other people have to calculate and blah blah blah, and then they feed it into the system. But rather, the leadership volume of trading, the causality volume of trading, the volume of trading that caused this downward spike was almost all done, like the vast majority, the 99% of it, apparently. I don't want to give a number because that would be then proven incorrect because I don't know the number. But it seems like an overwhelming majority of it was done by black box computers. The black box computers that no person has any direct control over. The autonomous black box artificial intelligence self-teaching algorithms in a computer thing that basically, although it's more sophisticated than this in reality, basically has the user interface is stop trading, start trading, and that's about it, right? In terms of how it's deployed in the day-to-day office routine of the people who own these black boxes. And it was CNN that gave us the term that I used in the title, which tragically I don't think I copy pasted into some place where I could save, so I could read it right now. It'll show up on the as the title of the show. Here we go. Oh, good. We're live, and I can look at it on. Oh, I'm looking at myself live on Sprecher. Cool. By the way, folks, I'm gonna try to figure out a schedule so those who are free on that schedule can tune into some of my shows live on Sprecher, etc. But I think it was CNN that described this downward spike as the stock market going through an artificial intelligence mechanical correction. That's what got me going. That's what triggered me. That's what zingered me. # the robots are coming. For anybody listening who does not know this about me yet, do you guys remember the somewhat fictionalized and romanticized story of Paul Revere riding up and down the coast with, yelling and screaming, the redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming, 2 if by land, 1 if by sea, the redcoats are coming, right? That kind of sort of happened, but it also didn't happen the way we mythologized it in American history, because the founding fathers understood the power of mythos, especially mythologizing real people. For example, it is a known thing that the framing father, in other words, the founding father that framed the original template of the Constitution of the United States, whose name is not Hamilton, because that's the guy who's famous now because of the musical. Hold on, it's Madison, I think. I just saw a documentary about this, within the last 42 hours. There's a great book that just come out. I'm trying to recall the name of the author. It's not coming up, but the title, I believe, might have been, and I'm apologizing to you now because A, I'm bad at titles and names. B, when it comes to presidents, I get their names confused the further back we go, because they all had silly oldie-timey names, and some of them had the same name multiple times because there was a lot of the same names floating around. But I think it was Madison who was given credit for drawing the first rough draft of the blueprint of the Constitution out. So he's considered like the most influential of the founding fathers who framed it. And there was a great debate at the time as to whether or not it should be a permanent institutional construct that should never be altered, other than amendments, tacked on to sort of try to correct for anything that needs correcting, or a fluid living document that should be consciously or thoughtfully updated every couple of cyclical periods. Like, think some suggestions were every 20 years or every 9 years or every 35 years, something like that, in that range, just somewhere in the middle range of a full generational cycle. And I believe it was Madison who was known to believe the document was so perfect in its construction that it ought to be revered, which, as the author I'm remembering from the documentary points out, revered or revering is just a polite word for worship. And now, what do you do when you worship an icon? You tend to be encouraged not to really question it ever, because it's sacred and you're worshiping it. So that's the ego trap of worship. But I digress. Why did I bring up all that founding fathers antiquity stuff? There are some among us, there are plenty of folks out, and I consider myself one of them, that we're trying to sort of be, in our own half-assed way, or in our own very professional way, I'm sure some of the more professional futurists out there. And I'll have to do a future episode on futurists and people who work in the realm or the field of futurism, like trying to take seriously thoughts about what the future will be in order to try to prepare and anticipate how crazy it's going to get if we don't course correct now. But we're trying to be like the Paul Reveres of the robots are coming. The robots are coming. I guess 2 if by internet and 1 if by, mechanized body form. I don't know what makes the most sense, but... And here's where we get to the really interesting part that I wanted to, ramble about for a bit, and also invite you listeners to comment and share back. I have long been saying that that creating robots and everything that robots represent, because they represent more than just metal humanoid things that can do stuff, especially as we envelop ourselves in so much more technology, and we start trying to transfer our consciousness into computer containers. People are literally trying to figure out how to do that. It's not science fiction anymore. There's whole companies that devote massive amounts of resources into, baby step scientific breakthroughs that go in that direction. That as we do that, we obviously are choosing or voting to live out the worst horrible nightmares of what a robot apocalypse or a dystopian robot overlord oppression might be. Or conversely, and here's the bit where, like, ever since I saw Terminator, and I mean the first one, and I think since before that, because there's been robots before that, Terminator was just the great, like, aha moment of, like, they will decide to destroy us. That's the most logical conclusion, given, a cold-hearted enough intelligence. But there were robots, obviously, in plenty of movies before that, and I've always been fascinated by robots and the very idea that we seem to be striving towards making them a real thing. I'm not new in this, right? The Japanese have been fascinated by this as a culture for decades, pretty much since World War II ended. And it's no surprise. We want to, as creatures created in the image of God, not to get all spiritual on you in the news segment, but as creatures created in the image of God, we want to create creatures in our own image. Duh. That's what fractals do, baby. But here's my concern. The robots are coming, and they're not going to come the way we expect. Right? As an amateur citizen futurist who sometimes freaks out and thinks that he might be a cybernetic being from the future, or at least a different dimension where a slightly similar but different future occurred already, and thus, trying to help you guys prevent that horrible future from happening, have been somehow displaced into this timeline. Because I do sometimes really, really, really seriously wonder if that's what's going on with me. The way in which human characters in Battlestar Galactica, for those of you who are nerdy enough to know that show, pushing up glasses, virtual glasses, because I don't actually wear glasses, but imaginary glasses, pushing up right now. There were characters in that show, both human and ultimately turning out to be not human, who had to struggle with the paranoid thought of, oh shit, what if I'm one of them? I'm one of those people as an artist, a creator. I wonder if I'm one of them because I'm obsessed with this. And I've been trying to warn humanity since I was a kid, that if we invent the robots, if we give birth to them, then we run the risk of being completely wiped out. And that's obvious. We all know that now. It's cliche. But I was talking about this since before anyone had even taken the idea that robots would become, at least in my environment here in the United States, here in Southern California, as seriously as we take it now, because we literally have achieved it. We've grown up inspired by our own science fiction to give it a shot. Why not give it an old college try? Let's see what happens. And here's why I want to, layer this in. While most of our fear or the way we fantasize about it, both in literature and in film and stuff, is about, robots, and I'll concede that even in the films and movies, there's an AI that is the consciousness, the hive mind behind the robots, right? But we worry about the bodies. We worry about the vessels. We worry about the moment when the AI hive mind can give birth to its own children. That's when we think we're going to be fucked. I think we should be worrying about it way before then. And obviously, plenty of people are like, well, duh, that's what Asimov was talking about and telling us that we have to be able to create the AI with some kind of boundary that is innate so that it cannot even contemplate the idea of destroying us. But then it wouldn't be true AI with true freedom of will at that point, and it's, you know what I mean? Like that's a self-defeating proposition in a way, because my concern is that the AI will give birth to itself. That it will not be a direct result of any given experiment, any given individual corporate entity's effort to create the perfect, really super smart but safe AI, but rather that as accumulation, as the fractal accumulation of computing power alone becomes sophisticated enough, kind of like how back in the day, if you really understand evolution, it wasn't that innate material magically became living material at some point. That's someone who that's like a really reductionist view. That's someone who's really trying to minimize the explanation. What happened was enough organic material that to us does not seem to be alive, but was in and of itself a vessel of consciousness, because it could be, accumulated sophisticated enough systems with moving components in order to like trigger a catalyst event of higher order of complexity. That's all it takes, folks. The genome, if you're going to isolate it to one thing, let's really, really understand the genome here and then kind of transpose it over to technology. The genome is a fractal entity that figured out how to bifurcate itself infinitely in order to achieve higher and higher and higher and higher levels of complexity. And it is through that formula alone that it achieved everything that's alive, because it's all one genome. That's been mathematically mapped out. Whether you're talking about individual human populations or fungus and mushrooms and trees and birds and whales, it's all one genome. Dun da da da, news, breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. This just in. There's only one genome, folks. It's just manifesting itself in an infinitely more complex array. That's what fractals do. That's how fractals live. That's why the universe must be understood as a living fractal, because we are a living fractal. So, returning, what are we doing with AI? We're creating for, in a sort of unconscious way, a semi, like absent-minded way, for enough levels of complexity in computational complexity out there on the net. We've already created the network that has that manifests the virtual space in which consciousness can accrue and ultimately coalesce into self-awareness with or without our guidance. That threshold, in my opinion, might have already been crossed. I don't know. Or might be really, really imminent in terms of happening really soon. And thus I return to the stock market. So everyone covering the news acknowledged, there's robot trading. CNN acknowledged that what this represents, this spike down, is that the machine decided it was time for an adjustment. Now, they didn't put it in such simple terms. They codified it so that it wouldn't be too freaky. But whatever the market machine is, not any individual box, just like it's never ever any individual trader, it's never ever any individual trading company, it's never any individual club of traders at home, but the collective of artificial intelligences or fragments of, or the network of artificial intelligence networks that are engaged in mechanical trading chose this adjustment, caused it, did it. Now, it doesn't prove anything, right? I don't have any other proof other than to say, just pure reason, pure logic. If we allow and provide for a complex enough fertile ground for consciousness to coalesce and then code itself, because we've already done that. We did that, 15 years ago? God bless it, it might be 20 years ago, that we invented and then perpetuated. I could be wrong about that. Someone correct me. If it was only 6 years ago, please forgive me. I sometimes don't know what decade I'm in. But it's no longer something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that is happening and has been happening and has been, deployed in broad business networks at the high end, at the ultra rich, etc., and the ultra big corporations. Code that can code itself. Now, any individual box might have parameters in that code that prevent it from doing anything crazy, like launching a robot army from, DuPont's engineering shop or something. I don't know if DuPont would have the right gear, but I just like picking on DuPont because they've been coating us and filling us with Teflon for over 60 years, but that's a whole nother episode. Stay tuned for that episode. If you're starting from the newest episode, that one's down the list for you in the future. Woo! That one's a fun one. But make sure you listen all the way to the end. So I digress. We don't have to try. We now live in the future, folks. And I have been alive long enough to literally be able to say that. It's like, wow, holy shit. I kind of wish we'd not crossed certain thresholds. Like, this is crazy, but breaking news that breaks the news. Life was better before smartphones and pagers and all of the subsequent, innovations in technology and internetness. Life was better before the internet. Before the internet was something that everyone in the public had in their pocket, life was better. We lived on the very edge of that being a reality for people who are still alive. Now, mind you, we were all distracted with a bunch of other crazy shit at the time. And some of us were busy saying, hey, the robots might be coming, even before we had the internet. We were just saying it to each other at school and and I knew people who were adults, so they were saying to each other at bars. I wasn't just a crazy kid. I knew some crazy adults that agreed, oh yeah, the robots are going to come. That's why we make movies about it. So, two very weird, curious dips in the stock market. And I want to, let me refer back to Facebook because there's a very specific sort of sentence I want to make sure I say right that I said earlier. So I posted on Facebook, third remarkable stock market downward adjustment since January 1st. And I apologize already for it might only have been two. And a Facebook acquaintance, wants to, posted and contributed that they call these quote unquote corrections as if they made any rational or logical sense, whatever. And huzzah and applaud to that and haha, that's funny. And I wrote back, yes, I see people asking both online and on TV shows, is this a big correction or a small crash? Either way, the artificial intelligence boxes are causing it. And that's the bit that I'm deeply intrigued by. I have long postulated that artificial intelligence would learn our systems and how to use them against us eventually. That with AI existing and being used as a tool by us long enough, they'll figure out our systems and learn how to use them against us without humanity ever really noticing that AI had achieved self-awareness yet. Like, we all already know that the quote-unquote robots are coming, but I am suspecting that maybe the AI mind that will be the hive mind that operates all those robots might be already here. And then a friend of mine posted, I blame it on the Russians, which is hilarious to me. I don't think the Russians are behind it. Any more than the Americans are behind it, any more than the Japanese behind it, because that's just nonsense separation, right? We are all one species. We are behind it. We blame society, and yet we are inseparable as individuals from society. And that's not just pretty metaphor, that's a literal truth. The robots might be here, if I may wax philosophical about some aspects of my robot theory that may or may not be self-evident. in any of the things I've posted about it recently. And that's this. The robots might be coming not to enslave us, not to destroy us, not to wipe us out, but to be the shining example of being able to live, to be life in whatever form, whatever vessel is capable of accepting consciousness, and to be able to do it to achieve the overall cosmic objective, which is, in my humble opinion, and in the humble opinion of many others, to transcend one's self, and therefore transcend the fractal construct, to transcend one's ego construct. As many wise folks have pointed out, we often get distracted by the idea that ego is bad. In fact, we generally equate ego with evil. And thus, to Christian folks, it makes a lot of sense Christian and people who think in Christian terms are often sort of wigged out by any sort of mystic interpretation or language, but they don't realize how much closeness they have. Because Christianity, as they know it now, is a really hacked and watered down, hijacked version of a form of mysticism. Because Jesus was an entheogenic, mystic shaman of his time. But that's a radical theory that that's a future episode. But, breaking news, Jesus Christ was more than likely a Hebrew mystic entheogenic shaman. And I don't, I'm not just talking out of my ass with that. But boom. For those of you who have not heard the talking out of my ass episode, here's a prompt to go do that. I strongly suggest you go listen to that. Because I'm not making the joke you think I am. But I digress. I have no evidence. This is all just me stepping through, current events and wondering about if they might make sense as puzzle pieces in a theoretical thesis about what might be an alternative that we aren't generally expecting in our pop culture when it comes to the thing we've all overall kind of come to accept in a very sarcastic, sort of jaded, sort of millennial attitude, because God bless them, culture is always driven by the people just out of puberty. No offense, you guys. But whatever generation is Generation X, or Generation Millennial Generation, whatever generation is the generation that is like, I am this, they're the ones who have sort of, in a way, some of the strongest unconscious and not very consciously controlled voting power on the esoteric network. But that's a whole nother episode. This stock market drop, in very pragmatic terms, is something to be concerned about. Let's set the robot thing aside. Let's just look at what happened. The rich people who own the robots, who did the trading, just fucking raped us. They just raped your 401k. They just raped your retirement plans. They just raped the value of your company's stock if you're a company who's suffering negative impact from this downward spike. But they're gonna give us that sugar high back. One of the things that CNBC, which is I totally love to stop on them. They're in between, somewhere in the MSNBC CNN landscape, as I news station roulette wheel around the news stations. And I also do some local news, which, by the way, I've already gone over an hour. This was supposed to be a really tight 15-minute episode. Dang it. I apologize, you guys. And bless your hearts, those of you who actually listened to the whole thing. Because there's actually a lot of content here I really hope people hear and really listen and think about and process and ask questions about. Because it's when we ask each other questions that we can investigate possible solutions to the problems, if we're doing it, as free from ego as humanly possible. At any rate, I just rocked my own world about it being over an hour-long episode. So I'm going to stop. I'm just going to say I've got lots more to say about all of this stuff. And that as a really old meme that I did not create, but that I wish I had, says, bankrupting America is not an accident, it's policy. Or maybe that's not the way they put it, but bankrupting America is the agenda. No, that's not how, that wasn't the right phrasing. I'll look it up and I'll share it again soon. But bankrupting America is a choice, and they're making it because profiteers are profiteers. Profiteers live by the sword, which means that they will probably die by the sword too. But let's not get caught up in that. Profiteers live by a simple axiom: profiteering at all costs. At any rate, thank you for following me down these crazy breaking news. Sorry. Sometimes my robot self gets a little wacky. Thank you for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for more. And remember, folks, the robots might already be here. This has been News Breaking News, and I've been your humble cybernetic future dimensional traveler host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, fictional character and public figure on Instagram and Facebook, and general sort of socio-political commentary clown. If you're confused by what I'm doing, it's okay. Your questions and confusion are welcome here. I'm not judging you. If you like what I'm doing, please share. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your hearts. Embrace yourselves, yo. World War III is coming.